Hey, I'm Melissa.
And I'm Whitney.
We started this true crime podcast over a glass of wine and quickly turned from true crime listeners into true crime advocates.
So get comfy, pop a cork, and grab a glass because we have work to do.
This is Cults, Crimes, and Cabernet.
Some content may be unsuitable for sensitive listeners. Discretion is advised. This week, we have our good friend and fellow advocate, Eric Carter-Landin, on. He is the host of True Consequences podcast. We talk about him all the time and all the great things he is doing within this community. We wanted to have him on so he had the opportunity to share his brother's story. So, Eric, whenever you're ready.
So Jacob's story, I don't even know where to start. Usually it's really hard for me. I just kind of start talking and then I eventually get to the point. I've been fighting for justice for Jacob for about 35 years now, which feels like forever. It's almost my whole life, with the exception of 6 years. It's consumed everything for me in the last few years, definitely. So my parents were married in Socorro, New Mexico in 1979. No, 77. And it might be 79. I don't know. I'm not a historian.
In the 70s.
In
Your
the
parents were
70s.
married in the 70s.
Yeah. So my mom was 17 and I think my dad was like 19 or 20 when they got married. And shortly after they had, my mom had gotten pregnant with twins. One of the twins was miscarried and then the other one died after birth. He was maybe an hour old when he died. His name was Randy. He was the first baby to be born, Randy Landin. My mom said that he had really curly hair. She actually didn't get to even see him alive because she was so drugged up because he was breech. And so she only got to hold him after he had already passed. And then I was born in 1980 in November. And my mom had some problems with my birth. Like I think the embryonic fluid was leaking throughout her pregnancy, and they were really worried that I wasn't going to make it. But lucky for you, Whitney and Melissa, I did.
Lucky to know you.
So thankful that you made it.
So I was born in Socorro, New Mexico, at Socorro General Hospital. I was probably one of the last few births in that hospital before they moved it. And then it became a haunted house for a while. Not really, but that was the rumor. And then now it's like a school. I really liked being an only child in a lot of ways, I think. I like to have all the attention from my parents, of course, because that's just my personality, I think. But I also was lonely. My dad was an evangelist, Pentecostal evangelist, and he traveled a lot. If you can picture, like, he was one of those big tent revival people where they would go around to different small towns, throw a tent up, and then have church every night for 7 days. Or he would go into another church and preach there. My mom, as a young mother and with a young child like myself, she had to really mostly just take care of me. And my dad would often, like I said, be gone. So I started praying for a little sibling, for a brother, probably around the age of 3 or 4. I started really praying for that and pressuring my parents to have another kid. And there was one day, we were living in Texas at this point because we had moved around a few times just because of my dad's job. So we were living in the valley, the Rio Grande Valley. I think we were in Edinburgh, or maybe it was Brownsville. I don't remember. It was somewhere down there. And it was a really big day. I remember I had just had my training wheels taken off of my bike, like that moment, right? So my dad had been pushing me and he kept telling me, I got you. And then he let go and I was going on my own. And then I wrecked into a tree because, of course, I did. I don't think he taught me how to brake.
That's one way to stop.
It stopped me for sure. And I was crying, of course, because I was, I think, 4 years old, maybe almost 5. And my dad stooped down, my mom stooped down, and they were checking on me. And they said, you did so good. We're so proud of you. And we have a big surprise for you. And they told me that my mom was pregnant. And I remember I got so excited, I started like running around the park, screaming and yelling and jumping up and down and just really super happy that I was going to be a big brother. And Jacob was born on July 1st, 1986. He was 10 pounds when he was born. He was a giant little butterball turkey. I was over the moon. I was super happy. I finally got my prayers answered. I had my brother, and he was the cutest. He was a crazy kid. He had so much energy. He was fearless. My mom always called him a daredevil because he liked to do crazy stuff. One of his favorite things as he got older to do was we had one of the old like wind up baby swings and essentially a death trap, but it was the 80s
In rightful fashion, it was covered in lead-based paint.
and it was rusty and sharp as well.
Yep.
Yeah, so Jacob's favorite thing to do was in that swing, it would swing him forward and backward. And as he went forward, he would grab the front two legs of the baby swing. And as it went backwards, the whole thing would fall. And he would lay on the ground laughing. Like he thought it was the funniest thing that had ever happened. And his laugh, it was like Eddie Murphy in a weird way. I'm not even joking. He sounded like
A little baby with an Eddie Murphy.
a little
laugh.
baby with, yeah, his laugh was like, like, that's how we laughed. It was the weirdest thing. So maybe not quite Eddie Murphy, but that's the closest laugh I think that I could think of to compare him to. He liked to crawl around in the kitchen and pull all of the drawers out of the cabinets so that knives and forks and spoons showered all around him. He thought that was amazing. It was
Because this was before baby proofing as well. They didn't have the little clasps that you kept drawers closed with.
No, it was like, good luck with your life. Even myself, I got into mouse traps. I stuck tweezers into electrical outlets. Like the 80s were wild.
Like, how did we survive? But we did.
It was definitely like survival of the fittest, right?
Yep,
But
natural selection at work here.
yeah, yeah. So that was Jacob. And I went ahead a little bit to talk about his personality and stuff because I think it's really important for people to know who he was. And even though we didn't get very much time with him, he made a huge impact in our family. Sorry.
It's okay.
Ugh.
Take your time.
Yeah, he made a huge impact in our family. He was a bright light and literally a bundle of joy. He was a great, amazing kid. I think he might have been too big for the world. Like I mentioned before, my dad wasn't around much. My mom wasn't able to work, and my dad was pretty forgetful about sending money back home. And so there were times where we were not sure if we were going to be able to eat. There were times when my mom and I would pray for food because we didn't know what else to do. And sometimes people would just leave food on her doorstep. There was one neighbor that lived next to us in the apartment complex we lived in who would often just drop off a box of groceries to us, which I thought was pretty amazing. But my mom started to get tired of being a single mom. She started to get tired of having to do everything herself. So she was thinking about going back to my grandparents' house in New Mexico. And then she found out my dad was having an emotional affair. I don't think it was a physical affair. It was definitely more of a emotional connection with another woman. They would talk every night on the phone for hours, and my mom was home alone with the kids. When she found out about that was the last straw for her. And she took me and Jacob and we moved to New Mexico to live with my grandparents so she could start finding a job and trying to get her life together because she knew that she had a support system at home that could help take care of us. Around this time, my dad's best friend, who I'm not going to mention his name throughout this, just because I don't want to jeopardize any potential prosecution on this person, but we can call him John for the sake of just having something to call him. I have a lot of other things that I call this person, but for now, John will work. John started coming around. He was my dad's best friend, so he knew all about everything that was going on with my family. He knew about my dad's emotional affair. He knew that my mom had left my dad. This person was not a stranger to my mom or to my family. So, like I said, he was my dad's best friend, but also his father was a minister at the church that my mom went to when she grew up. My whole family went to that church. His dad married my parents. My mom went to school with him, went to church with him. Our families spent time together. She believed that she knew this person. My family was very connected with his family. His sister is my mom's sister-in-law, or was at the time. His aunt is my godmother. So I just say all of this because I think that there are people who, when they hear my story, are like, oh, she should have known better. Obviously, she could have seen who he was right away. And honestly, nobody did. Nobody knew that this person was capable of what we will later find out.
And this is one of those things that we come across in the true crime industry so much. And it's very much victim blaming of you should have known better. But it's always the people that you least expect it to be, people you trust. Because if every person that was a bad person in the world, you could see that coming, then there would be they wouldn't have any victims because the bad
Right.
people, we would all be able to point them out. We'd see all the red flags.
Exactly.
So that's horseshit.
I agree. But I always like to lay that foundation so that when it comes up later, when people start to have those feelings, they can try to hopefully remember when I say
Yes.
that this person's been involved in our lives forever. John starts coming around my mom and starts showering her with attention and gifts and love and affection. And the same with me, really. Starts to really pay attention to us. And it's something that we both were very much starved for that kind of fatherly attention because it was the 80s. We didn't know about love bombing. We didn't know about the cycles that predatory abusers use to lure people into what I consider a trap. And as I've talked to my mom, I actually learned some more stuff recently about that he had did that I didn't know about and my mom had forgotten about, but she remembered. Actually, it was yesterday when we were talking. He would go and pay her bills without telling her. So she would go to pay her electric bill and would find out that it was already paid. And eventually she found out that it was him. And at the time, she did start to question him, like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Nobody does that. That's really weird. And his answer was, oh, yeah, I'm just trying to help you out. I'm trying to be nice. I know that you're struggling. I know that you have 2 kids and you're trying to make it. And I just thought I would do something nice for you because I like you. But what we find later is that behavior continues and it becomes more intense in the future. But I just want to plant that seed there for now. The way I saw that was looking back on it, it's very sinister to me because he's obviously trying to disarm my mom and also create this, in my mind, dependence on him, right? So that now she knows he can take care of her. He can be the one who is there for her. And my dad's not ever going to be that person. It's just all, when you look back at it, it all starts to get spooky. Just the amount of planning that went into that.
It's very premeditated of how do I get in deeper with this woman and her kids and the family? How do I dig deeper?
Mhm.
Start by filling her full of the things she's missing. Let me start paying the bills. Let her become dependent on me, and then she's trapped.
Yep. That's exactly it. And I think that's something that we're probably going to uncover more of as we look at this story more deeply. That's called foreshadowing. My dad is now really upset that his best friend is trying to date my mom. So he has completely distanced himself from my mom, myself, and my brother. My mom slowly she says that she wasn't really dating him. She said that everywhere she went, he would be there. And eventually they just started to be together because he was always there with her. And as they started to get closer, things started to happen to Jacob. He started to have injuries that were not easily explained. There was toilet paper thrown in his crib. There were sunflower seeds thrown in his crib when he was very small. And so immediately, John starts to tell my mom that it's me, that I'm jealous of Jacob. But he tells her that my grandma told him that I was being jealous and that I was hurting Jacob. And then my grandma, I later found out, was actually told by him that I was jealous of Jacob. And then in another story, he tells somebody else that it was my aunts who said that. But they also claim that he was the one telling them to look out for me and to be careful for me because I was jealous of Jacob and I was hurting him. And there was one injury that was so severe that it required Jacob to have emergency surgery. He had a skull fracture and he had brain fluid filling up in his cranium. And so they had to drain that out, and they had to put a styrofoam helmet on him. And again, I was blamed for that. John told my mom that I kicked Jacob. The first time he told her that he left me and Jacob alone so he could drop his kids off to their mom, and that I picked Jacob out of his crib and dropped him on his head. But Jacob was like 20 pounds at this point, and I was not even, I was probably like 40 pounds, maybe, because I was like 5. I was a little kid.
Nor should you have been left alone to care for your infant brother at 5 years old for him to drop his kids off.
That's the first problem.
Yeah.
I don't think that's true. I really don't, but maybe it is. I don't know. All I know is that the crib, I remember it was really tall compared to me. So I certainly couldn't have picked him up out of the crib from the ground. I probably would have had to have gotten a chair, stood on the chair, picked him up. And okay, maybe if I did that, maybe I could have dropped him, right? Because I was small and he was heavy. But even then, I don't think that would have been a force strong enough for him to fracture his skull. I don't know. I don't know what to believe, but Jacob has this injury. My mom doesn't know what to believe. And so she sends me to California to live with my dad, just to alleviate any doubt, basically. But the injuries didn't stop. Jacob still kept having injuries. And there's even a time where, before he died, where a neighbor called the cops or called Child Protective Services to say that somebody was beating Jacob. And the only person it could have been would have been John, because there was nobody else there at the time. So there's that anonymous call. There's also his ex-wife telling my dad that he needs to call Child Protective Services for child abuse against John. But again, people don't think that he's capable of this. He is a really charismatic, really nice person. And he has a lot of friends. And so nobody really believes that he's capable of this. Maybe it was an accident. People start to rationalize things. And my mom certainly rationalized some of that as well. But also, she started to feel like maybe there was more to the story than what she was being told. And so she really started limiting John's contact with Jacob alone, to the point where there really wasn't a time where Jacob was with John shortly after I went to California and once the injury started happening again. And this is a different way of looking at this too, because after this conversation with my mom, I'm starting to see all of this kind of come together. He had convinced my mom. Okay, I'm going to back up a little bit. My mom told him that her favorite car was the 1979 Mustang. So he buys a 1979 Mustang, red and black, which is my mom's favorite colors. Okay, so that's the first thing. All right, so there's that. He also signed us up for his insurance, his medical insurance, without telling my mom, and also on the insurance forms claimed that they were married. Okay,
So a little bit of insurance fraud going on here.
and that's going to come back later in a minute. But yes, this is all planned. This is all pre-planned. This is all premeditated. So just keep that in mind. He also took it upon himself to find a mobile home that would be perfect for all of us to live in. And it just so happened that the mobile home did not have power. So on April 9th, he told my mom, I found this place for us to live in. It's going to be great. We have to go see it tonight, though, and we have to see it before it's dark. I know your mom wants to go to church. And this is different from how I've told this on every other story because I just learned this information. You are getting the exclusive on this. So apparently he told my mom, I know your mom wants to go to church. Just have her bring Jacob by. And you can come straight from work so you don't have to go get him and then go back to the house. So have her bring him by and we'll go see the trailer together. And my mom was like, okay, I guess. What's the worst that's going to happen in an hour? And in less than an hour, there is an ambulance driving by on the road really fast at the grocery store where my mom was working. And John runs into the grocery store in a panic, saying that Jacob is unconscious and not breathing. And Jacob's rushed to Socorro General Hospital. And his injuries are so severe that he has to be airlifted to Albuquerque, which is 75 miles away. And Jacob is 9 months old at this time. And so my mom and John get in the car, they go to the hospital, and then they learn that they have to drive to Albuquerque because they wouldn't let anybody go in the helicopter with Jacob. So they rush to Albuquerque. My grandparents are driving. The whole way up there, John is telling my mom, it was an accident. I didn't do this. I didn't do it on purpose. I didn't kill him. I didn't hurt him. And then he starts saying, this is going to look really bad for me. They get to the hospital and they tell my mom that Jacob has a subdural hematoma and that his brain is swelling. And they have to do emergency surgery. So they rush him into surgery. And he didn't make it through the surgery. And so the doctor comes out to talk to my mom and John and everybody who's there. And my mom, of course, freaks out. And she goes running and screaming and crying away. And John is standing there just listening to the doctor. And he starts to say, this isn't going to look good for me. This looks really bad for me. I can't believe this is happening to me. He never once asked if Jacob was anything about Jacob, not once during the entire time that they were getting to Albuquerque when they got to the hospital. He never once asked how Jacob was. He didn't bother to console my mom whenever she found out her baby had died. He just stood there talking about himself. The investigation starts immediately because the doctor's convinced that there's something going on here. So they start asking questions. The doctor asks him what happened. And he tells the doctor that he was dubbing some cassette tapes. Jacob wasn't feeling well. He gave him a couple of cassettes to play with while he was in his walker, but he got fussy. So then he picked him up out of the walker, set him on the couch with the two tapes. And Jacob must have fallen off the couch, hit his head on the coffee table. And then he noticed that he was like vomiting and his eyes were rolling back. And the doctor said, I can tell you right now that there's no way that's what happened. The injury that I see is not consistent with that type of injury. And so John changes his story again and says, actually, what really happened was I was holding him and I was trying to comfort him and he slipped out of my hands and I thought I could grab him fast enough. And then his head hit the armchair, which has a wood arm. And the doctor said, again, that's not consistent with the injury we're seeing. What we're seeing is blunt force trauma. And we're seeing about the size of a man's open palm. And he then clams up. So state police get involved. They interview my grandparents. They interview my mom. They interview John. My dad and I come back from California and immediately from the airport, we're taken to an interview room with the state police, like immediately. And I'm being interviewed by a detective. And I'm being asked if I kicked Jacob or if I hurt Jacob. It was awful. And they asked me if John hit me. And my answer was no, but he always acts like he's going to. And yeah, it's still hard. It's still hard to talk about that. I still hold a lot of pain around being questioned by police, but I was convinced I was going to go to jail. I thought I was in trouble. After that, we had the funeral, and John kept trying to talk to my mom. He kept promising to tell her what really happened, and said that the only place he wanted to talk to her was at Jacob's grave, which is really weird. He does that a few times later on too. But the investigation's going on the whole time. I really wasn't aware of that, and I really didn't know what happened to Jacob. I thought maybe it was an accident. Maybe he did fall. I really didn't. I was too young to really even have an opinion, I think. But I started paying attention to the adults around me, and my grandpa one day came out yelling at John because John was coming to my grandma's house to try to convince my mom to come back to him. And my grandpa said, "Why don't you hit somebody who can talk, you son of a bitch?" And that's when I realized that other people thought that he was responsible. And that's when I started to have doubts myself. But then in July, or might have been June of the same year, 87, him and my mom are starting to talk again. And he's, "Look, I have to do this lie detector test. Why don't you guys come with me so you can see once and for all that I'm not guilty, that uh, this was an accident." And so we go to the state police office in Santa Fe, and we have to wait outside because it's a polygraph, right? We're waiting for, it feels like several hours in the summer. And John comes strolling out of the state police office, acting like everything's cool. My mom said, "How did it go?" He said, "Great, I passed." And so we believed him because he wasn't in jail. Maybe if that happened today, could have been a little bit more skeptical, but back then, people thought that the lie detector was infallible.
And as far as CPS and things like that go, there wasn't a major organizational push with child abuse in the 80s. It was there, but it wasn't like it is now.
Yeah, we didn't know a lot. Now, as a society, we didn't know a lot. These back in the 80s, this was still considered like a private matter. Domestic violence, especially, was considered a private matter. So they did investigate. There was one Child Protective Services when Jacob was still alive. There's one investigator that came after the neighbor filed the anonymous complaint, and John yelled at her and told her to get the fuck off his property, and she left. And then she talked to my mom separately, and my mom, of course, "So you think he's capable of hitting your kid intentionally?" And she said, "No, because I see him with his own kids and because I've known him my whole life. So no, I don't think he's capable of that." So I don't really think that went anywhere, although after Jacob died, it started again. There was another investigation. Child Protective Services came back, got involved. State police were involved. Socorro police were involved as well, but nothing happened. So my mom believed that it must have been an accident. He must have been telling the truth because he passed the polygraph, according to him. So once that's over, he tells her, "Guess what? I put you on my insurance. I said that you're my wife and you're not. We have to get married or I'm going to prison."
So now he's putting your mom in on the lie. He
Mhm.
has to bring her in, and he's guilt tripping her into staying with him.
Forcing her,
Yes.
forcing her. So she marries him. And that's when we really get to see John's true colors. That's when the mask falls off. He's no longer this friendly, jovial guy. He is now an evil, manipulative, abusive person. My mom and I were talking about this yesterday. There was literally nothing that we could do, right or wrong, that would not lead to him beating her up. She told me about a time where she had been home all day, he had been working all day, she cleaned the whole house, she was making dinner, she was in a good mood, she was having a great afternoon, and for no reason, he just starts beating the shit out of her and telling her that she makes him so angry and she's acting just like his ex-wife, and if I just even glanced at him, I was giving him dirty looks. And then my mom would say, he wasn't giving you dirty looks. And then he would start beating the shit out of her for fighting with him. He would,
So are you living with them at this time? You moved back in with your mom?
after Jacob's funeral, my dad left and left me there and did not talk to me again until I was like 15.
What was the reasoning behind that? You were a 5-year-old.
He couldn't stand to see my mom with
Oh.
John and also deal with grieving his kid, so he abandoned his only living kid. I don't have a good answer for that. I would get locked in my room for hours and hours. If I needed the restroom, I would have to knock on my door because it was locked from the outside. And oftentimes he couldn't hear me because his music was so loud, so I would have to figure out other ways of relieving myself in my room. One time I used a sharp knife to spread some mayo on a sandwich, and because it wasn't the right knife, I was shoved in a dryer for 6 hours. He didn't like how I looked at him one day, so he ran over my puppy. Every day was a new horror. And I would sleep with a kitchen knife, a can of Aquanet, a lighter, and a baseball bat under my bed. And I was 7 years old. I was ready, if anything happened, to defend myself. This continued for several years. And he also started sexually abusing me and told me that if I ever said anything to anybody, that he would kill me and my mom, and nobody would ever find our bodies. And I believed him.
Why would you not? You knew what he did to your brother.
I saw what he did to my mom every day. Like, we would have to, if we had to go in public, we would have to recite this, memorize, this is what really happened. And if we couldn't get it right, he would make us do it over and over and over and over and over until we could tell the lie perfectly, until he believed us. And it was a motorcycle accident. That's why my mom's all beat up. Or, yeah, she went hiking and she slipped and she fell. There was always some excuse for why she had bruises everywhere and cuts. And so it was pretty hopeless. I didn't know if I was going to live. Every day was just like survival. So we would do everything we could to not set him off. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter what we did. It didn't matter what we didn't do. There was always a reason that he flew off the handle. And it was always violent, and it got increasingly violent. And he would say things to my mom like, the only way you're leaving me is in a body bag, you stupid bitch. He would say shit like that to her all the time. Or, I'll kill your other kid, just constantly. And so people will always often say, why did she stay with him? Why did she put up with that? Why did she tolerate that? And when he's threatening to kill you and your son, and you think she thought she was the only one that was getting hurt. She didn't know about what was happening to me. She didn't have any idea because I didn't say anything. So I think if she would have known, she would have tried to leave. But I think she felt like if it was her, she could deal with it. And I think she probably had a lot of guilt about what happened to Jacob. And I think that in some way, she probably felt like she deserved it. She didn't know I was being locked in my room or locked in the dryer. She didn't know any of that stuff. She had no idea because it only happened when she wasn't there. And then half an hour before she got out of work, he would pull me out and say, okay, your mom's coming home. You better not fucking say anything because I'll beat her ass again if you do. So I wouldn't. I would just be on the couch acting like everything was fine. And then he starts to groom my cousin for sexual abuse. And she's 13, I think, at the time, maybe 14. And he's calling her and he's telling her how hot she is and how much he wants to be with her and how they should be in a relationship together, but nobody would understand. So don't say anything to anybody. Don't tell anybody. This is between us. This is our secret. But he didn't know my cousin very well. She's a loudmouth and she doesn't give a fuck at all about anything ever. So she said, "Oh, yeah, don't worry. I won't say anything," hangs up the phone and immediately yells for my grandma and tells my grandma. And then my grandma tells her to call my mom. So she calls my mom. My mom goes up there to talk to her, up there because my grandmother lives on top of a hill. Nobody else would know that. Sorry. My mom
I
goes
was like, up where? Upstairs?
up the hill. My mom goes up the hill to talk to my grandmother and my cousin and learns that he'd been doing this for a while. He'd been trying to get her to come over when nobody was around. And I think that was the incentive my mom needed. She now was, in her mind, no longer the only person being hurt by this person. We went home, we got all our stuff. She left him, and then he starts leaving all these letters. And I have all these letters on her car at work, on the car at home, at my grandmother's house, begging her to meet with him, begging her to talk to him, giving the letter to her boss so that she would give it to her, just like stalking, essentially. And in every letter and in every conversation, he's telling her to meet him at the graveyard. Meet me at the graveyard. I'll tell you what really happened. Meet me at the graveyard. I'll tell you the truth. I'll give you the real story. And so my mom kept saying no. And finally, she's like, the only place I'm meeting you, the only place I'm talking to you is the police department. So if you want to meet me, that's where we're meeting. And then you can turn yourself in. And so he said, okay. So she starts going down the hill. And he's coming from the other direction. There's a four-way intersection. He's coming from the other direction. He parks in the middle of her lane that she's driving in. Okay. And he's in this little 1980 Datsun sedan. Think of a Nissan Sentra, but Datsun and rust colored and in the 80s. Pleather seats. My mom is in the giant lift kit truck, like with monster truck tires. And she sees him. And she pushes the gas. She starts going faster. And so he pulls out just in time, gets out of the way just in time, and pulls him like side by side to her, rolls down his window and says, let's talk right now. And she's, I told you already, I'm talking to you at the police station. So if you want to fucking talk, let's go to the police station. So he says, okay. So he follows her. My best friend is in the truck with us, and also his son. And this moment in my life this is why I have so much respect and love for my mom, aside from her being my mom. So we pull into the parking lot. He parks next to her. He comes to the driver's side door. She opens the door. She picks him up by his shirt. All right. And she starts punching him in the face.
Your mom's a badass.
Total badass. Love this.
Yeah. And she was like, she's fucking 14, you disgusting pig. What's wrong with you? Throws him on the ground and starts kicking his ass. And of course, he's in front of the police station, so he's not going to do anything. He's also like 5'5", 5'4". He's not a very big man. He was very skinny. So it's not that crazy to think that she could pick him up. He's not a normal sized man. He's a little guy with little man syndrome. That's why he picks on people who are weaker than him. Just saying, and I hope he hears that.
Which are children, because
Right.
nobody else is weaker than him.
Yeah. Children and vulnerable women who are in an emotional state or dealing with trauma or whatever. But It's his MO. So the police are just watching this happen. They don't do anything about it, but that's fine because they never did anything when he was hitting her either. He was friends with all of them. They played basketball every single weekend. When the cops would come, my mom was getting beat, he would be like, I don't know, man. She's just a crazy bitch. She came after me. I'm sorry. And they would laugh, ha, and then they would leave. Really not surprised they didn't do anything in that moment. But we left, and he stalked us for a good 3 years. He would follow us around town. He would come to my bedroom window at night and tell me that he was going to fucking kill me and my mom. My cousin was babysitting me when a lot of those times when that happened, and she remembers all that happening. It was scary. We had a restraining order against him. He couldn't be within 100 feet of us. And he still did. He didn't care. And nobody did anything. Nobody cared either.
But here's another example of, yes, you get a restraining order, but what does that piece of paper do?
Nothing.
What are you going to do with it? You're supposed to call the cops. If he's buddies with the cops, you've accomplished nothing. You're going to, I think it's that movie Enough with Jennifer Lopez where she's, what's that piece of paper going to do? Am I going to ball it up and throw it at him? What does that do? Nothing. Does nothing.
Yeah, you can do everything right. You can leave. You can get a protection order. You can do everything right. You can move. It still doesn't stop them from doing what they do. It just doesn't. So if you're thinking, why didn't she just leave? Maybe think about that. Also think about the fact that you are 75% more likely to die trying to leave a domestic abuse situation. 75%. The chance of you getting murdered goes up 75% just from making that decision. So why didn't she just leave? My mom, after leaving him, goes to the district attorney at the time and the police and says, I want you to arrest this person for the murder of my child. And the police actually did arrest him in 1991 for one night, but he was never charged officially. So there's actually nothing on his record. The arrest isn't even on there, which is really weird. She goes to the DA and the DA says, we're not going to prosecute him. And she says, why not? And they say, because you gave him an alibi. And what they're talking about is during the investigation, when they asked my mom if she felt like he was capable of hitting Jacob intentionally, and she said, I don't think so. Also, nobody was in that trailer with Jacob except for John. Nobody could have given him an alibi. There is no alibi. My mom gave up at that point and waited for the new DA to come in. And then the new DA said, we could prosecute, but we're missing a lot of evidence. A lot of evidence is gone. We don't have it. We don't have any of it. I don't know what happened to it. So in 2002 or 3, she reached out to the cold case unit at the state police and asked them to do something because it'd been too long. Nothing was happening. 10 years after she left John, she goes to the state police and Sergeant Thomas Christian, opens up the investigation, goes through everything, gets all the files, and goes back to the DA and says, look, I think you can prosecute this. Even though you're missing evidence, there still seems to be enough for you to at least charge with second-degree murder, even if it's negligently caused. Like, you can still do something about this. And the DA said, actually, we can't because of the statute of limitations. And this is where somebody's going to be yelling into their car speaker or at the TV or whatever they're using to listen or watch this and say, Eric, you're crazy. There is no statute of limitations on second-degree murder. And that's where I also would say you are incorrect. In New Mexico, there was a statute of limitations on second-degree murder up until early to mid 2000s. That legislation was repealed by the state legislature. And then there was a case that went before the Supreme Court in New Mexico that was prior to the statute being overturned. And it became, through the Supreme Court, there's precedence now that you can actually go back to before the law was repealed and press charges. So that has opened the door now for us to be able to continue to pursue the case, because at the time when the cold case investigator had brought everything to the DA's attention, the DA closed the case. And that was something I didn't know until 2 years ago, until I got the FOIA request on my brother's case. I learned a lot. I learned that the case was closed, which was very upsetting because I believed for the longest time that it was just cold and not closed. And I also learned that John confessed, which was shocking to me. Now, I wish I could tell you that's it. We solved it. We got the confession. He's in jail now and he's going to prison. But unfortunately, there is no documentation of that confession. All I have is one sentence in the police report that says, "We no longer need to conduct a polygraph because the suspect confessed." It doesn't say what he confessed to. It doesn't say what circumstances that confession was given under. There's no recording. There's no notes. There's no signed confession. There's nothing. There's literally nothing. I also learned that July of 1987, John failed his polygraph.
Back when he told you that he had passed it.
He failed 2 questions. I don't remember both of them exactly, but one of them was, did you intentionally hit Jacob in the head area? And he said no. And that was shown to be untrue. I know that polygraph results are often shaky at best, but I think when we look at the entire story and we look at his behavior, I didn't talk about the fact that his story changed, I think, 5 times total, depending on who asked him and when he was asked. The only consistent thing in his stories is the dubbing of cassette tapes for his brother. Everything else changes dramatically depending on who he's talking to. So I learned about all of those stories, and it's been enlightening over the last couple of years to really just to know all of this stuff, and it really makes me angry, honestly, because I feel like if police would have done their job when Jacob died, and if he could have been put away for Jacob's murder, maybe my mom and I wouldn't have had to go through all of that. But they didn't. They failed. They failed to do their job. They failed to protect kids. They failed to protect my mom. So it's really hard. It's really hard to be understanding. It's really hard to not be angry at them. So we've been begging anybody to listen to us, anybody that would listen to us. My mom even got involved in fighting for legislation in New Mexico with some senators about child abuse. She actually was part of the team of moms who went up to the state capitol to fight for baby Brianna's law to be passed. If you don't know baby Brianna's story, it's one of the most horrific child abuse cases, I would say, ever and anywhere, but certainly in New Mexico and in New Mexico history. So my mom was part of that push for that law. And we've tried everything we could. And I started to see these cases come through New Mexico that were very similar to Jacob's. Baby Brianna was one of them. Omar Varela, Jeremiah Valencia, Victoria Martins. Some of these kids' names you probably recognize if you listen to true crime or if you've heard any true crime stories. These were big cases. New Mexico has a horrible track record with child abuse, with dealing with child abuse. Kids are dying constantly here, and nothing is changing. And so I kept saying, somebody needs to say something. Somebody needs to do something about this. And then I just decided I was going to. So I created my show to do that. And yeah, through the advocacy and through telling Jacob's story, his case was reopened actually last year in March for the first time in 34 years.
Can you tell us kind of the steps you had to take to get it reopened?
Oh, yeah. I think telling his story a lot was part of it, because a lot of what you have to do in these situations is to make so much noise that they can't ignore you. It's politically unpopular for DAs to lose cases. So because it's a political office, if they don't feel like they can win it, they don't necessarily have to prosecute it. They get to decide if they're going to prosecute something or not. And they don't really have to give a reason why. They can just say, it's not a strong case. We're not going to prosecute. And so you have to make it politically unpopular for them to not prosecute, whether they win or not. Right. So going to as many sources as possible to tell the story puts pressure on them. They now know that the world is watching them and watching what they're doing, and they care about this case. And as I started to build a big following, I decided on the 34th anniversary of Jacob's death, I was going to do the 10 days of Jacob. And Jacob died on the 10th of April in the early morning hours of 1987. So on the 1st of April, 2021, I asked all of my listeners and all of the listeners and viewers of the other true crime shows I was on to call, to write, to email the DA in Socorro County and demand that he reopen the case. And he lasted 2 days, which made me feel really good. And he sent an email to the Attorney General and copied me on it. And he said, we're being inundated. I have a small office. I have a small staff. I don't have the resources to deal with this. I don't have the time to deal with this. So I am not going to open this case. I'm not going to do anything with this case. I'm actually just going to give it to the Attorney General, which is actually the best thing that could have happened to Jacob's case. Because now we're taking it out of Socorro County, where everybody knows this person, where everybody has a history with this person. We're taking it out of there and we're going to the state level, which is amazing.
It's a true third-party entity coming in.
Yeah. Yeah. And they have resources. They have funds. They've got a lot more than Socorro County has. So that's also a positive thing. So taking it out of Socorro County was the best thing that could happen. But I still have to continue putting pressure on the Attorney General because, again, it has to be politically unpopular for anything to happen, unfortunately. And another unfortunate thing is that this Attorney General who reopened the case is actually, his term is ending in December. So I will have a new Attorney General to work with in January. So I, again, need to continue building that pressure just so that when the new Attorney General comes in, there's no question that he needs to do the right thing.
And now you have a whole army of new listeners to inundate another new office to keep the pressure on them.
And I might have to do that. And that's it. That's where we're at. That's the story.
Spending so much time with you, I am still really shocked that you went through all of this. I just want to hug you right now.
Yeah, I think it explains a lot of why I am the way I am in a lot of ways.
I think that you are just so brave for putting yourself out there for Jacob to do this for him. It breaks my heart that this is what families have to do to get the bare minimum of what we are supposed to get in this justice system, between knowing you and knowing people like Julie Murray and meeting Mariah Day and Brandon's family and all the people that we have met in this industry. It breaks my heart that this is what it comes to, of forcing people to listen that something's wrong and something needs to be done. But I'm glad that we are here for you to help continue to fight, because I don't know what we did without you in our lives before now.
I love you both so much. I don't know what I did in my life before you either. Thank you.
It's so weird that we've only known each other for what,
Couple
14
years.
months?
Yeah.
No, not even that. I mean, it's just, it's crazy.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it was 2021, right? In July.
Yeah.
Yeah. It feels like forever.
It does.
In a good
You're
way.
definitely
In a good way.
making changes. Like you're doing it for Jacob. We just couldn't be more proud of you for
Thank
everything.
you. Thank you. I got to keep going and I got to keep doing this. So even when it's hard, even when I call you having an emotional breakdown,
Fine.
which has happened a couple of times.
It's all right. We're all going to break down at some point.
Yeah.
But that's the best part about this community and building friends in it, is that There's so much support.
Absolutely.
What's the future look like? If you can bring justice for Jacob, what do you hope to accomplish after that? That's a loaded question. I'm sorry. You didn't know I was bringing the heavy hitters
No, that's
today.
okay. I don't want to stop at Jacob. I want to help more people. I want to make an impact in my community. It's really amazing how much this process has healed me and my mom. We both have had a tremendous amount of healing from talking about Jacob's story. Because for so long, you have all of this shame and you have all of this guilt about everything that happened. And just to be able to help other people has helped me deal with that in a better way and has helped me understand that I'm not alone. And it feels good to help other people understand that they're not alone, even when it feels like they are. It's big and scary to go up against your own state government. It's not easy to do. It's scary to start talking publicly about somebody who's threatened your life on a regular basis.